I often get asked to run for various elected positions or boards here in Newberg, but my response is typically that I don't have thick enough skin to handle everything that comes along with politics. And as I'm sure you're aware, Newberg is pretty evenly split politically, with a slight conservative leaning. So political races can be very close and very stressful. And personally, I just don't want to have anything to do with it. But while I don't ever see it in the cards for myself, I do have a lot of respect for people who do run for office, regardless of whether we agree on everything or not. And there's pretty much no one that agrees with literally everything that I do. So that takes us to today's episode with Newberg Mayor Bill Rosacker, who took the position of mayor earlier this year. So we'll be talking about what it was like growing up in Newberg, what ultimately made him decide to run for mayor, along with topics like homelessness, civility, SDCs, which are different utility fees here in Newberg that everyone wants to be lower, and also the vision for the future of Newberg. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts. I'm a local realtor in Newberg and a member of several organizations in Newberg where I get to interact with some really amazing people and share their stories on this podcast. I also have the Living in Newberg YouTube channel, which is all about what it's like living in Newberg. So if you like these podcasts, then you'll probably enjoy that channel as well. I love this town. I love helping people move here, and I love helping people learn about our amazing community. And I do this podcast because I want to share all the great organizations and people who make this town the great place that it is. And that's the heart and soul of this podcast, to share stories of hope and generosity in Newberg and the surrounding area to help people be inspired, get involved, and ultimately have hope for our future. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Mayor Bill Rosacker as we talk about Newberg. All right, well, Bill, thank you for joining me. It's fun to finally have a sit down and talk to the new mayor of Newberg.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
I look for opportunities to talk to the citizen.
yeah.
It's a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, last time I talked to the mayor was Rick Rogers, who I know you guys ran against each other in the last election, and now you're the mayor, and so you'll come with a different perspective on everything. So I look forward to sharing your thoughts and everything with our town. But you grew up in Newberg, right? So tell me how things changed in Newberg since you were a kid to now.
Well, I'm an old guy, so I moved here, I think it was in 64 on my 4th birthday. When I was a kid, of course, I was involved in shooting sports. I was a member of the 4-H rifle team, and we had our own animals. I grew up on 10 acres just outside the city of Newberg, and we had our animals in 4-H and FFA and all that good stuff. The way that the town has changed is, population. When I first moved here, I think the town was about 6,800 people.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we are over 25,000 now. So as you can imagine, things have changed. Fields that I used to play around and hunt pheasants on are now, for the most part, housing. And, their neighborhoods. And, just speaking of that particular article, when I was in high school, a lot of people came to high school with rifle racks in the back window of their pickup, and sometimes those were used in the evening, and people actually had rifles. And of course, nobody ever worried about stealing them or getting them stolen. And there was a lot of trust in those days. People assumed that people were trying to do good. There were bad people, but it didn't seem to be at the forefront that it is today. I think the internet has changed that a lot, the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that as kind of an aside. Back in the day, before every single thing was covered, maybe there were still things happening, but we didn't know about it. Whereas now we're aware and maybe we take more precaution, but we're also feel like a lot more nervous and scared because we see every single little thing that happens. So maybe we don't need to get too much into that.
Well, the truth is that we are living in the safest time that this, have ever been in this country. And yet, because we are so attuned to the news being on all the time, we really feel that it's a lot more dangerous than it is, because we hear about everything.
Yeah. Well, even in Newberg, so I recently did a video for my Living in Newberg YouTube channel, and Newberg is actually the 4th safest town in Oregon. I think a lot of people don't recognize that even among Oregon, we are also in a very safe town. but every little suspicious thing then gets kind of blown out of proportion. I think we're a little bit spoiled, honestly. But
well, the police chief, Kosmicki, would like you to know that we're working on number one. So
okay, well, that's awesome, and I'll have to have him on here sometime. So, as a kid, I mean, you moved here when you were 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever imagine yourself becoming mayor, or is that something that happened later on?
You know, I've thought about that question a lot because I don't remember ever having those thoughts. That being said, I think everybody has said at some point in their life, man, I could do a better job than that guy. You know, and I'm not even talking about the last mayor, just you know. But no, I never saw myself running for office of any type, especially not mayor of Newberg.
Were you always like kind of an outspoken, like were you always someone who, you know, shared your opinions like in high school, or were you like someone who liked being on stage, or were you more of like a in the background kind of person?
I never liked being on stage. In fact, public speaking is something I was never interested or felt that I was good at. In fact, after I got elected, I joined Toastmasters.
Okay.
To work on those skills, and now I can get in front of a crowd without feeling like I'm gonna, you know, soil myself. That's been a help. But yeah, I've always been opinionated. In fact, the people I went to high school with would be happy to tell you that that's the truth. I've been involved in city government. I've lived in and outside the city most of my life, and every time I've been inside the city, I have been involved. I've been on budget committee. I've been on downtown redevelopment committee and some other things. And I've always been interested in how our government works.
Yeah. So what ultimately led you to decide to run for mayor then?
One day I was, just over about a year and a half ago, I was watching a city council meeting on Zoom. We were all shut down at the time. And I heard the mayor ask just a random question, what is car camping? And I thought, man, that's an interesting question. Why would he do that? He got his answer, and that was the end of that discussion. We moved on. So I called him or sent him an email, and we sat down and talked about it. And he indicated that he thought that we needed to allow people to live in their cars in Newberg and possibly in tents in the parks and the public areas. And I suggested I didn't think that was a very good idea, and apparently we just disagreed on that. So come to find out that the city of Newberg was working on a car camping initiative, and they were well on the way to institutionalizing car camping in Newberg and tent camping in our streets. And that was kind of what made me decide to become more involved.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit later, because I'm sure there's nuance to that, and I know at least here in Newberg there are a lot of different opinions, and I think it's worth having a discussion about. And you know, on that note though, with different opinions, you know, there's in any election, and people ask me all the time to run for different things, and I'm like, look, running for any office is a really great way to make half the town hate you pretty much immediately. And so I admire anyone who does that, because, and this is what I say, is like, I don't mind if people don't like me for just because they disagree. But when people are going around spreading mistruths or misinformation, that would be really difficult. I'm sure you experienced some of that as well. I know both sides always. Were there any specific things that are like, yeah, people are saying this, it's just not true?
Well, I spent too much time on Facebook during the pandemic, and it was interesting to me how you could make a statement and then somebody would take it as an argument and try to go a different direction and start an argument with me, with anybody. And I just didn't care for that. You know, I thought that if I give you an opinion that, you know, you can agree or disagree, but let's respect the opinion and continue the conversation. So I have learned not to pay too much attention to people who, you know, just spout things because for whatever reason. If they're off topic and you know, a lot of times deceitful, then there's just nothing to be gained by engaging that conversation.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about the Civility Project and the conversation groups, United as Neighbors, with that desire to, hey, let's have conversations. Because there aren't a lot of hard conversations, especially from the time you grew up to now. I think there is a much, some people use the phrase divided. I think there's a much more equal split politically than there used to be, which obviously leads to contention. And I think it can also lead to us really deeply considering what we believe. And I think it can lead to productive conversations. And you've been a part of several of those events and organizations, haven't you? As like the conversation groups and stuff.
I joined the conversation group a year ago, right after the Old Fashioned Festival. That's where I was introduced into it a year ago. And it's a very interesting group. It is, well, just so your audience knows, what we are trying to do is have conversations with people who we disagree with without being disagreeable, without being mean, without preordaining what the other person is thinking when they're asking the question, but honestly listening to the question and responding to it, carefully and civilly. I think that the group has a lot of merit. It has my full support. In fact, I have in my wallet a small version of the
With the pledge?
Yeah, the pledge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I think it's, I appreciate your support. I'm kind of, the podcast is kind of loosely affiliated with the United as Neighbors name, I suppose. And I really think that's something that a lot of the contention and disagreement in Newberg, I think those groups are, it kind of reminds me of when there's a fire, and then after the fire, there's more growth that happens. And I kind of see that as some of that growth. And I really hope more of our population can get involved in that. And even if they can't come to the specific conversation group events, embrace that ideology of disagreeing but being kind at the same time. And I think it's okay to disagree. We're always going to disagree with people. Sometimes it's very, very deeply core held beliefs. And when people disagree or vilify those opinions, it can feel like a personal attack. It just takes practice. So anyway, I guess one of the other things, moving on, so the election to now, it's been 8 months since you've been in office. There's several things you've been working on as mayor, different projects, initiatives. So what are some of those projects, and where are we now with those?
Well, we've had quite a few things come up. The most recent, and this was an item that I campaigned on, it's in the weeds, but systems development charges. Mm-hmm. Here in Newberg, we use systems development charges as a method of providing infrastructure for future growth. Roads, highways, roads, sewer, water, and wastewater, stormwater, I should say. It's, all that stuff is expensive. And the city decided a lot of years ago to not make the citizens who already live here pay for that, but instead put it on the citizens who are coming to town. So the expenses add up to a lot of money, and the system has to be managed carefully, or else the charges are either way too high or way too low. And it's a very complicated system. It has a lot of moving parts, and up till now, we didn't even own the process. We would have to hire a consultant.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And so because of that, they didn't update it very often. They just gave it automatic increases based on a construction manual out of Seattle. Last year, the increase was 11 point something, as I remember. And we, the city council, said, wait a minute. And we wanted to change that. And the staff pointed out that you can't change it. It's in your ordinance. So we began a process in August. We sat down with a very good group of Newberg business people, residents, and also staff and city council members. There are 3 city council members, Molly Olson, myself, and Mike are on that committee, or were on that committee. And we started out by learning about the process. You know, how does this happen? Where do these charges come from? By the way, the SDCs on a new house right now total about $40,000. So
it's insane. So me in real estate, you in building, understand that when we talk about affordable housing, it's essentially impossible if you have so many charges and permits just to build the darn thing. And you can't make it affordable house because, I mean, that on top of labor costs and material costs. So, and I'm sure you felt that quite a bit in your construction, and many people in the industry. So I think it's helpful to know. And I've heard a lot of people complain about it, and it was always just kind of this like, yeah, it's a bummer, but it's built in there and it's really hard to do anything about. So it's interesting to hear. So, okay. So right now it's about 40,000 for new construction.
Yeah, it's about 40,000, roughly, give or take. And of that, about $9,500 is park and rec fee. So we have nothing to do with that. The park and rec has to maintain that part. So we're looking at about $30,000, a little under $30,000 for the city's portion. And you brought up affordable housing. That is huge. We want to figure out a way for especially single parents, moms and dads, to be able to afford a house to raise their kids in. You know, as you know, as a real estate agent, pretty darn hard, unless if you're a lawyer making that kind of money, to be able to, you know, maintain a household and raise your kids and work a job. So the answer has to be, you know, that we have to find a way to provide those houses. And one of the things that I intend to do is to build smaller homes. Because if you can build let's say a 2,000 square foot house and it costs you $300 a square foot, you should be able to build 1,000 square foot house and have it cost $300 a square foot. But it doesn't work that way because they both need the same water meter. They both have the same SDC charges. They both have at least one bathroom, which is expensive, and of course a kitchen. So it's already a tough nut to crack just to make them affordable. But one of the things that we did is we structured the SDCs. So if you are going to build a house that's under 1,000 square feet, so a real small home, you're going to get a 75% discount on SDC fees.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. To offset that, to make it revenue neutral for the city, we determined that if you build a house that's over 2,200 square feet, then you're going to pay a 1.25 multiplier on the SDCs. And of course, if you're between 1,000 and 2,200, you're going to pay the normal rate. So first thing we did is we were able to bring the SDC fees down about $3,000, and just by removing items from the future list that didn't need to be there, don't need to be there. And so that helped. But the next thing we did is our city manager, Will Worthy, who is a wonderful, organized individual, had the staff create the matrix. And so he now has a spreadsheet. So every 2 years, we're going to be able to revisit this. And so we don't need the automatic increases or decreases. But every 2 years, we will compare it to our capital improvements list and see if it's still the right amount of money. We'll be able to adjust.
I love that man. He's done so many amazing, innovative things. Anyway.
Well, what's old is new again.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we did, again on the SDCs. Do you remember XL Fitness used to be in Newberg prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where they were.
Down south of the airport.
Okay, yeah.
On Highway 219 in that business center. They were a gym that a lot of Newberg residents were members of and had been there for many years. I'm not sure how long. But during COVID, a couple of months into it, their lease came up for renewal. And if you remember right, they were shut down. They had no business at all. And their landlord, now this is all secondhand, this is from the owners to how this went down, but the landlord said, we need to sign a new lease. And the owner of XL said, well, that wouldn't be wise because I don't have any income. And he was told, well, okay, but you're going to have to move. So he started looking for less expensive places. And he went around the corner on Winooski Street and he found a warehouse. And it was much smaller, less expensive, but it was big enough. It was still 5,000 square feet, and he thought it'd be just fine. So he he went to the city to find out how much it would cost. And they said with SDCs, it was going to be $230,000. That's exactly what he said. So he spent a few months arguing with the city. It's trying to explain to him that this was a real simple thing. He couldn't afford $230,000. If he was forced to have to spend that, he'd have to choose to close his gym down. And he was told by the city, well, okay, that's what it is. And so he did. He closed his gym down, and now he has one location in McMinnville. So in our SDC process, we talked about that, SDC. And I know several people who looked at doing business in Newberg and got the same sort of answer, and they just went away. In fact, I was one of them. After I shut my framing company down, I thought, you know what, I'll get a food cart and I'll start selling breakfast burritos. So I called the city of Newberg, and this was before I was mayor, before I was running, and I asked them, how much would this cost? And they said, $34,000. And I said, do you have any idea how many breakfast burritos I'd have to sell just to gross $34,000, let alone net? And they said, yeah, it didn't matter. That's what it is. So as we were looking at the SDC fees in the committee, we said we wanted to eliminate that change of use SDC. And the staff warned us once again, as if we hadn't heard it enough times in 6 months of looking this over, that we have to make sure we're paying for infrastructure. So I asked the question, how much does the city make on this particular SDC? Well, the answer wasn't available today, but I can call you tomorrow. So one of the other members, Bubba Kay, looked at me and he said, I'll bet it's zero. And I said, yeah, I'll bet it is too. Sure enough, the next day we got the email from our engineer, and she said that it was easier to do than she thought because it was zero. So we're able to eliminate a fee that is driving business out of town completely, and it won't cost the city a nickel because nobody's ever paid it. So all those vacant businesses downtown are probably vacant because somebody has looked into renting them and found out that there was a big, huge systems development charge fee, and they said, no, thank you. So the Chamber of Commerce at our last council meeting came and Merrill Kunkel and thanked us for changing that SDC because now she thinks that we will be looking forward to filling up those vacant, storefronts in Newberg.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting to be a part of this. Kind of makes me wonder why I had to come along to ask that reasonable question.
You know, it's interesting, and that's kind of this thing of there's always different priorities and values, and some things are, just an example with, I guess when this is published, it'll be the recent cleanup on Rogers Landing. So you're part of the Morning Rotary Club, right?
I am.
I don't know if you'll be joining us down there, but there's a big cleanup project. And it just took looking at it, and I realized, why is this not been cleaned up? Like, this could be so amazing. This could be a much better spot. And it just turned out no one had ever asked a question. And or sometimes people maybe ask the question, but then what's the next step of saying, okay, let's do the hard work of doing this? My guess is because it hit you in a sore spot, being on the receiving end of some of those things, both as a business owner and as construction. There's a pain point that was enough to say, hey, I'm willing to make this happen. Whereas for most people, it's going to be, oh, that's unfortunate. That's that. So I think it had a special place in your heart in this form of a sore spot, not being able to do business the way you wanted to. Well,
I think that's very insightful. Same with you and Rogers Landing. The county. Who knows if they would ever come and do that project?
Well, no, because they only have one person on their whole staff. like, I can't do this entire thing by myself. So, and no one had ever offered to come and help.
How surprised were they when you asked?
I don't know if they were surprised, but they were very pleased. They said, that sounds amazing because, yeah, we know it needs help. And I mean, CPRD here, and sure, there's a lot of expenses that get put into CPRD, but they also do a lot in terms of parks and all this stuff. With the county park system, there's not a priority given to parks. So that's why, if that was run by CPRD, it'd be a very different place. But without getting too much into that, yes, they were very, I'd say, pleasantly surprised, probably.
Right.
So what other projects in the last 8 months have you been working on?
Oh, boy. Learning. Certainly a lot to learn about, how government works. I mean,
have you been surprised in any ways? Like, oh, I didn't realize this worked this way, or?
I'm always surprised by how long it takes to make change and how hard it is to make change. It's like the SDCs. Well, I could have told them what the problem was, and we could have written an ordinance and changed it. But no, we've got to go through a process that takes 6 months, and that's just to get us to the beginning. Now, these changes we're trying to get done by next year, April 1st, which is when they'll be implemented. That's when the new budget year starts. So for planning and building. So yeah, the amount of time and effort it takes to change amazes me, always has amazed me about government. But we're, let's see, other thing, I should have made a list of the things. I wanted to talk about the SDCs mainly.
Yeah. Well, we can probably come back to some of the other things, but one of the points you made, when one of the things one of the things that kind of first made you think about running for mayor was the whole point of car camping. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting from my own personal standpoint, not that I've camped in a car, but from volunteering at a local organization called Love Inc., we see a lot of people who have been car camping, and a lot of it is like what you were saying, like a single parent who, whether there was a divorce or it was an abuse situation and they had to leave, and now they can't afford to stay anywhere for many, many different reasons. And they're afraid to go to the shelter because there's sometimes people on drugs there. They don't want their kids around that. And the best option to them is to stay in their car. So that standpoint, there's a part where my heart goes out. And at the same time, if there's a car that's in my neighborhood, I don't know who lives in it, and I've got kids, and I don't know what that person's situation is, that can feel concerning. And we also I understand not wanting to make it an ordinance that just everyone can be anywhere. So there's that tension again of wanting to take care of people in need, and then recognizing that there's got to be a better way. And we also have to think of people who, if there's someone who can legally just park in front of your home every single day, and you can't control, they may be on drugs, or say, not that there's not people on drugs in houses and that kind of thing, but yeah, there's that tension there. So how do you, and I'm sure you've heard many of the other sides, so how do you wrestle with that tension?
Well, this, first of all, because of Measure 110, we have people coming from all over the country to the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, because they're allowed to use drugs without being harassed. So make no mistake about it, a large percentage of the people who live in our shelters in Newberg, in Yamhill County, in the state of Oregon, in Portland, are drug addicted. We talk about people who are mentally challenged. And unfortunately, with the drug epidemic that we have going on, it's hard to tell who is mentally challenged and who is just simply on drugs, and who is mentally challenged and that gets exacerbated by also being a drug user. So, in my opinion, if we wanted to do something about homeless, and I'm not sure that the state of Oregon wants to do anything about homeless, that's an entirely different conversation. Step one would be make drugs illegal again. And when I say illegal, I don't want to throw people in jail for, smoking a joint or even shoot up heroin. But since we don't have drug treatment centers available for that use, traditionally in our country, the jails have been that. And there's nothing wrong with letting a person dry out from drugs in jail and then getting them into a treatment program. And if they finish successfully, removing the conviction from their record. Because some people do, not everybody intends, I'm sure nobody intends to get addicted to drugs. It just works that way. So that's certainly one issue. Yeah. The interesting thing about car camping is the law already says that you can let one person live in your driveway in their car. And I was one time I car camped. I was out of the Army. I took a job for a farmer. I was living in Eastern Oregon in a town that only had a few people in it. I decided that I needed to go someplace that had some females. And so I came back to Newberg, and at that time we had an unemployment office here. And I went in to sign up for unemployment and found out I wasn't eligible because neither the Army nor farmers pay unemployment. So anyway, long story short, I ended up car camping. I found a friend who lived in an area of the country that actually had some jobs available. And he let me live in his, actually sleep on his couch, but my possessions all were in my car for 2 weeks. And I was motivated during that time to find a job and to get out of that situation, which I did. So there's certainly some benefit to allowing people to, to car camp. And like I said, you can let somebody car camp in your driveway. It's perfectly legal. And, that eliminates all that. As far as having people living on the streets in their cars, what benefit is that to them? Obviously, if they're in the street and instead of in somebody's driveway, they don't have people here. They don't have family here. Mm-hmm. Or, for whatever reason, there's nobody here that can help them get out of that situation. So by allowing them to live someplace in the street, whether it's in a car or on a tent, in my opinion, you're not helping them. You're only enabling them. And they don't need to be enabled that time. They need to be helped. You mentioned Love Inc. Love Inc. is a wonderful organization. And the best thing about Love Inc. and Habitat for Humanity, as far as that goes, is they require personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. They don't give you anything and just to give it to you. And unfortunately, with the people who are living in our shelters and the people who are living on the streets in our state, they're given too much. I'd like to point out to people that when they see homeless people here in Newberg, they're not panhandling. And the reason is they don't need to. They have money in their pocket from other sources, all of them, derived from your tax money. So we want to help people. Our hearts are in the right place. Everybody who is trying to help homeless people has their heart in the right place. They want to do the best thing. But unfortunately, enabling them to live in circumstances that are outside the ordinary are probably not how we help them. And so, in my opinion, we need to use organizations like Love Inc., who have the training and the expertise and know how to help people and help them up, not just help them out.
Yeah. Now, there's another one that I know there's a very divided opinion on with the Peace Trail Village. Mm-hmm. And I know there's been kind of some different thoughts. And I think my personal opinion is I think there was a lot of narratives given out that maybe weren't quite what was accurate. What is your thought on that?
Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was one of the chief petitioners on the Kids Not Camps petition, which was started because my interest was that I was fighting the car camping initiative in Newberg, and the folks who wanted to stop the Peace Trail Village from building a transitional housing center right next to a school sought me out, and we talked about it, and I helped them out. Back then, yes, there was a lot of misinformation. They were the types of housing that they were going to build they were building. They had 3 of them sitting on their property. One of them was occupied full time. The other 2 were, I know some people had lived in there for at least for a short period of time. They were put in at that site illegally. First of all, they weren't safe for living in. In other words, they had no egress exit. So if you were inside one of those buildings and a fire started between you and the door, you had no way to get out. You would have died in the, and that's why we have public fire safety laws, is to prevent that. Those homes weren't inspected. They were built. They were basically home built travel trailers. And Newberg had just finished, or what they called the middle housing legislation. You can build an ADU in your backyard now, an auxiliary dwelling unit, and but the 2 things that they did not allow in Newberg, they did allow tiny homes, cottage clusters, duplexes, triplexes, quads, and it seems like I'm leaving something out, but what they specifically did not put into it was tiny homes on wheels and travel trailers. And the reason is they're not safe. They're not designed for somebody to live in full time. So anyway, when I became aware, because there was an article printed that showed what they were doing up there, I went up and I drove up there and I saw it. And I could tell by looking at it as a contractor that none of the work that they'd done had been done properly, inspected. They didn't get permits for anything. They didn't have any inspections done. They had just tapped them into their existing sewer, which should have been replaced back in about 2017 when they came into the city. They should have been required to hook up to the city sewer. So anyway, myself and another gentleman both pointed it out to the city, and we were kind of snowballed. Our planning department didn't seem to care, and that was not characteristic of our planning department, who I've dealt with before, and they're usually very rigid about what is and what isn't allowed. Now, Peace Trail Village, Jared Jones has made the statement to me that they were told back at the time that they could put those houses in there, and if any neighbors complained, they'd have to take them back out. Well, okay, so I guess there you go. They thought that nobody was going to complain. So what they're trying now, they eventually moved. It took the city quite a while to act, but they eventually moved people out of those illegal units, and they told them that they had to apply for permits to do it properly. So that was my objection to Peace Trail Village.
Yeah.
Now, if they are now proposing cottage cluster, which anybody can do in their yard. You could do, if you have a room in your backyard, you could build a cottage cluster yourself. But these are going to be houses on foundations that are going to be inspected. They're going to have the proper fire, life, and safety measures required. And, hopefully they'll be done in such a way that it won't irritate your neighbors.
Yeah.
So that's what they're able to do now, or what they're allowed to do, and what they're attempting to do. So the city has been a big supporter. The city gave them over $400,000, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear that perspective, because I think the original Kids Not Camps, it seemed they were presenting it as a homeless camp. I don't know if that's how it was presented to you. Whereas I think the actual idea of what it is, it's the cottage clusters on foundations. To me, it seems like a good idea. Maybe you're kind of the same opinion if it's done properly and there's still proper codes and everything. But those small units, I think it's having something like that where maybe rent is only several $100s rather than $2,000 a month will allow people to get out of their cars and live in a stable housing and hopefully get clean if they're on drugs. But yeah, no, it's interesting to hear that thought though.
Well, the cost of that project now to build it correctly to code is going to be $1.8 million, is what the last figure Jared Jones gave me. Actually, Leslie said 1.5 at her council meeting the other day. But either way, it's pretty difficult to build houses for that kind of money and rent them out cheaply.
Yeah. How many are going in there? Is it seven, eight?
Yeah.
What is 1.8 million divided by 8? I don't know what that is.
Mhm.
9. It's less than a single family
Yeah,
house.
200.
To build 8 $500,000 houses would then be what, like 4 million? So I guess you're about half the cost, which doesn't necessarily mean you can rent out for half the price, but
The good news is they're going to be able to take advantage of our new SDC change, and that's going to save them $20,000 per unit.
yeah,
So
well, good for them. One of the other things I know you and Will have been working on is eliminating the debt. And at some point, Will's going to come on and he'll share a little bit about that. And there's a couple other things we got to talk about. In interest of time, though, what is kind of your thought in terms of let's get rid of the city's debt? What will that allow us to do?
well, that's fiscal responsibility is something that I believe in. And when I met Will, after I got elected, actually, he told me about his need to eliminate the debt in Newberg. And as some other people have pointed out from time to time, I'm not sure that the city needs to be absolutely without debt, but it's a nice goal, isn't it? You know, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't spend money on paying interest and we could therefore have a little bit more money to fix our roads? So it's the fiscal responsibility to do, and I'm absolutely in support, and I'm glad to be a partner.
Yeah. Is it? I don't know if is it public information how much money is spent on interest per year?
Yeah, it sure would be.
Okay.
But I don't have that figure.
I'm sure Will would. He's the one who's all the numbers and everything. Well, I'll have to have him on and he can talk about that in more detail. But I'm excited about it. I know it's a significant amount, and if that could be eliminated, it would allow for a lot of other cool things. But it's a big project. I know he's put a lot of his own personal stake in there. All right. So the next one is just kind of broadly in general. What is your vision for the future of Newberg? You've done some things with SDCs and some other things, but how do you see the future of Newberg?
Well, I never saw Newberg as being a bedroom community to Portland. Unfortunately, with the loss of the mill and our recent history of being unfriendly to business, we don't have a lot of industry here in Newberg. We don't even have a lot of commercial, so we're going to become a bedroom community if we don't do that. There are no jobs here. So my goal, or our council goals, I should say, is to increase the amount of industrial land that's available, increase the amount of commercial land available, and generally make Newberg a friendly city for people to do business in, so that we bring the employers back in and people can live and work right here in town.
How much of that has to do with the old mill site and what's happening there?
Well, the mill site is of course central to that issue, because I think they had about 250 jobs, 240 some, if I remember correctly. Good, high-paying jobs. So we've never replaced that. So ideally, we would find some businesses that would not only replace that, but add some more jobs than that. And that's a very realistic goal.
Yeah,
it's a good piece of property. It's in a good location. It has excellent access to I-5 south of Newberg without going through any towns. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get a good employer. And I think changing the fee structure so that we are competitive will make it possible for that to happen.
Are you able to share anything of what's currently happening with that right now, or where things are in that process?
Well, the folks who are selling it have been in contact with Doug Rux, the planning director, more than council or even the city manager. I do know a few things. I do know that there's at least one large company who's already in our community to some extent who's trying to purchase it. That would be a very good thing. I do know that there has been some interest from a server farm at one point, And I really don't think that that would be a good business for Newberg, because once the construction's over, it employs 5 or 6 engineers, which are good paying jobs, but it's just not enough, and it takes a lot of resources. So I don't think that I'm speaking for the council, and I need to be careful, but my guess is that this council would not be favorable to that sort of business. We're really looking for business that can bring jobs to Newberg.
Yeah, and I would happen to agree with that as well. I used to live in the Dalles, and there was a big server farm there, and they employed several people, but it's not the type of place where people can come and I guess if it's industrial, not just commercial, I kind of think, and I think at one point someone compared it to a river. They had a big industrial area, but it was a place where people could come, and it was a very much a community spot. So, I mean, that's kind of up to anyone's guess of what kind of business is going to be interested, what's going to happen with the whole riverfront master plan and all that. But yeah, I personally hope that it's, and is it just one parcel, or did they split it up?
They will split it up.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't have to buy the whole thing, I'm sure. I'm guessing. I've not had that conversation, but
yeah,
I'm sure they'd be happy to sell to multiple.
Do you have any guess on what kind of timeline we're looking at as when these kind of things might happen? Because they finished last year, they finished the final demolition. My understanding is they're maybe still doing some environmental cleanup, and then from there it'll be ready to set and build. I
think that they're just about full scale trying to market the property at that point. So, you know that world better than I do.
Less so on the commercial side, but I'm interested in it. And I live right over in the new River Run division on the south side of town. So it's going to have a big effect on us. If there's a place we could go and walk to, and I'm personally really excited. I think that in conjunction with the Riverfront Master Plan, how that all works together, is going to be exciting in the next few years. So same thing as you. Everything takes so long. I wish it could be next year and not, hopefully it's not another 5 to 10 years, but we'll see.
I would bet that it's going to. I would bet you're going to see at least one major purchaser, hopefully before the end of the year, but certainly within a year.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, depending on what they're proposing, there's a lot of time in construction. It's sure permits.
Oh. Yeah. Well, what's the message that you want to give to the community as mayor?
Well, I would like folks to understand that the state of Oregon has deemed that our cities are going to be much more dense than they have been in the past. And I'm not necessarily a big proponent of density, high density, but that's what we have to deal with. The House Bill 2001, I think, which was authored by Tina Kotek, who's now our governor, and is law now, states that any place that you can build a single-family residence, the city has to allow them to put in a tiny home, a cottage cluster, a duplex, a quad, a fourplex, and even with a Type 3 review, multifamily. So wherever you live, not so much at yours, your lots are narrow and long.
Basically already a cottage cluster.
Yeah. But if you live in a more traditional neighborhood in Newberg and your neighbor's house burns to the ground or puts it on the market, somebody could buy it and put high-density housing next to you. In fact, there's a lot on North Crater that has been available for some time. It's almost 2 acres, and they're going to put 31 condominiums on it.
Oh, wow.
They'll have 47 off-street parking spaces, and in that neighborhood, that's parking is already tough in that area. But that's the density that our governor has deemed we're going to build, and like it or not, that's what's coming down the road.
It's unfortunate. From the standpoint of affordable housing, there's an element that in some ways that's what's needed, but it's also hard when you're in the neighborhood and it's affecting, it's interesting to have multifamily or high density right next to lower density. It's kind of but yeah, like you said, it is what it is. Well, one last question I'd like to ask everyone. Given you're the mayor, you've been here a long time and you've seen the good and the bad, but what gives you hope for the future of Newberg?
We started talking about the conversation group. And what I have discovered, I'm certainly not the first to discover this, but when I sit down and talk with people who disagree with me vehemently on politics, when we sit down and actually have a conversation, we agree on a lot of things. And if we just talk about the things that we agree on first, and we present ourselves as reasonable people, in a very short period of time, we can start talking about the things that we disagree on. And we can have differences of opinion, but still respect each other's, belief. So I have a lot of hope for people. I believe that already you've seen the temperature of conversation coming down in our town. I certainly have. I think that we are going to learn to get along again. We don't have to change our point of view. We still can keep our closely held beliefs, but if we respect the other people, then the truth is we agree on a lot more than what we disagree on. So that's...
I agree with that, and that's actually really great to hear, because that's a huge part of really the mission behind this podcast even, is obviously I know people are going to have their beliefs, but to be able to be kind again, maybe get off social media, or don't allow people to just spew garbage, and maybe stand up and say, hey, let's treat each other kindly. And I think really Newberg is starting to see the culture really stand up and say, hey, we disagree, but we're going to still be kind. And I'd love to see more ways to do that, more ways to facilitate that. But yeah, I agree with you. I'm very excited, and I think we're going to see more of that. Well, thank you, Bill, so much for your time today. Thanks for all your work as mayor. I know it's not an easy job, and in many ways you can make some enemies, but I think you've also done a lot of good. So I appreciate that, and you taking the time today.
All right. Well, I appreciate you giving us this opportunity. I love this town, and I know you do too. So, hey, Newberg, let's start talking about things we love about this town, and let's quit dwelling on the things that we disagree about.
What was your motto again?
Forward together.
Forward together. All right. Well,
let's move forward together. Yes.
Thank you for tuning in to the Givingtown podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.